The vote passed by acclamation, and the conquered of settled worlds called it mercy. They did not call it mercy to humanity's face, of course. The delegates of the conquered were far too refined for that, too practiced in the long courtesies that had held their fragile peace together across 9,000 years and 41 member species. They called it the instrument of restraint. They called it a stabilizing measure. They called it, in the honeyed cadence of the Sithka orator who read the final language aloud, a gift of survival extended to a promising but dangerous young people. But behind the tall crystalline doors of the conquered's inner galleries, where the ambassadors gathered without their translators running for the record, they called it what it was. They called it the leash. The prohibition was total. From the moment the seal of the conquered struck the great resonance plate, no vessel of human registry could mount a directed energy weapon above defensive threshold. No human keel could be laid with the reinforced spinal geometry that a mass driver required. No human shipyard could fabricate the layered ablative armor, the redundant reactor cascades, the targeting lattices, the munitions bays. The list ran to 11,000 specific interdictions, each one a scalpel aimed at a particular thing humanity had built, or tried to build, or might one day build. Together, they amounted to a single sentence written in law across the stars. Humanity would never again be permitted to make a warship. They had reasons. That was the maddening thing, and everyone in the galleries knew it. Humanity had come out of its little blue system barely 3 centuries earlier, gaunt and clever and impossibly fast to learn, and within a single human lifetime they had fought the territorial war against the VTH Dominion and won it. Not survived it, won it. They had taken a war against an older, larger, better-armed empire, and they had ended it in 11 years with the VTH suing for terms, and they had done it with warships that the conquered's own analysts still could not fully explain. Ships that were ugly. Ships that were asymmetrical, patched, improvised, built in a hurry by a species that had not had time to learn what could not be done and so had simply done it. The conquered had watched that war the way one watches a house fire in the next valley, with horror and with a cold arithmetic. The VTH Dominion had been a bad neighbor for 1,000 years, and no one mourned it. But when the smoke cleared and the humans stood in the ashes holding weapons no one had sanctioned, the 41 species of the conquered looked at each other and understood, all at once and without needing to say it, that the thing in the next valley could burn down any house it chose. So they made the leash, and they told themselves it was mercy, because the alternative, a coalition war against a species that improvised warships faster than committees could design them, was a thing no one wished to survive. Humanity signed. That was the part the historians would argue about for a long time afterward. Humanity signed the instrument of restraint, and its ambassador, a small gray-haired woman named Adami who had buried 2 sons in the territorial war, put her thumbprint to the resonance plate without a tremor and said only, "We accept the terms as written." No speech, no protest, no threat. She gathered her people and she went home, and the conquered exhaled a breath 9,000 years deep, and for 11 years the galaxy believed it had done a wise and terrible and necessary thing. The conquered was wrong about which thing it had done. Kesa Moreno was 7 years old when the instrument was signed, and she did not understand any of it. What she understood was that her grandmother cried in the kitchen of their habitat on Bright Fortune Station, cried without sound the way old spacers did, and that her grandmother had built ships during the war, and that the ships were not going to be built anymore. "Why are you sad, Abuela?" Kesa had asked. "Isn't it good if there's no more fighting?" And her grandmother, Kesa Moreno, who had been a keel master at the Tycho assembly and had watched 100 ships slide out of the cradle to go and die and take the enemy with them, had wiped her face and pulled the girl onto her lap and said the thing that would live in Kesa for the rest of her life. "They didn't ban the fighting, Mija. They banned us from being able to fight. There's a difference, and one day you'll understand it, and I hope to God you never need to." Kesa had not understood it then, But she was a strange, quiet, watchful child, the kind who took a thing apart not to break it but because she could not bear not to know how it wanted to work, and the sentence lodged in her like a seed in a crack. They banned us from being able to fight. She turned it over for years, and somewhere in the turning, without ever deciding to, she began to look for the loophole. Not the loophole in the law. She was not a lawyer, and the law had no loophole. The Concord's jurists had spent 40 years anticipating every clever human dodge, every reflagged hull, every civilian vessel with hardpoints hidden under the paint. The instrument was airtight against warships. Kesa understood that by the time she was 15, when she read the full text for a school assignment and sat up half the night with it, tracing the 11,000 interdictions with her finger, feeling the shape of the cage. And that was the night, she would tell people later, on the rare occasions she told anyone anything, that she saw it. Not a hole in the cage. A door the cage's makers had not thought to build a wall across, because they had been so busy building walls where they expected humans to push. The instrument banned warships. It defined a warship with exquisite, exhausting care. 11,000 interdictions describing every component, every geometry, every capability that made a hull into a thing that could kill another hull. The jurists had been thorough. They had been so thorough that they had, without noticing, written down a complete and precise definition of the one thing humanity was forbidden to build. They had never once written down a definition of the thing humanity was forbidden to build it asterisk for asterisk. Kesa Moreno was 15, sitting in the dark of her grandmother's kitchen with the text glowing on the table between them, and she looked up and said, "Abuela, they banned the sword. They didn't ban winning." Kesa Moreno was 83 by then and going blind, and she had not built anything in 14 years. She looked at her granddaughter for a long time. Then she got up, and she went to a locked cabinet in the back of the habitat that Kesa had never seen opened, and she brought out a data slate so old it had a physical toggle on the side, and she set it on the table and said, "Then you're going to need to know some things I promised myself I'd never teach anyone again. To understand what Kesa Moreno eventually built, you have to understand what the Concord thought a war was. For the 41 species of the Concord, war was an exchange of force. Two fleets met. They hurled energy and mass at each other. The fleet that endured longer while inflicting more won the field, and the political consequences followed from who held the field. This was not stupid. It was, in fact, the accumulated wisdom of 9,000 years and 100 wars, refined into the elegant and terrible calculus that the Concord's academies taught. Force met force. The greater force prevailed. From this single axiom, the entire instrument of restraint had been derived. Deny humanity the ability to project force, and you deny humanity the ability to win a war. It was a beautiful theory. It had exactly one flaw, and the flaw was that it had been written by species who had never once in 9,000 years been genuinely, existentially, backed into the corner desperate. The Concord's members had fought for territory, for resource rights, for wounded pride and disputed succession. They had never fought the way a cornered animal fights, the way a species fights when the alternative to victory is not a worse treaty but the end of everything they had ever been. Humanity had fought that way twice before it ever left its own star, in wars the Concord had never heard of and would not have understood, and it had learned in the marrow of its bones a thing the Concord had never had to learn. That force is only one way to win, and very often the crudest, and almost never the decisive one. The decisive thing is always something else. The decisive thing is the moment your enemy understands, all at once, that continuing is worse than stopping. Force is merely one of the many roads to that moment. It is the loud road. Humanity, denied the loud road, went looking for a quieter one. And this is the thing the Concord never grasped, not until it was far too late. When you take a weapon away from a species that has decided it will not lose, you have not disarmed them. You have only told them with perfect clarity which weapons you are watching. Kesa Moreno spent 19 years building the thing they weren't watching. She did it in the open, which was the audacity of it, the thing that later made conquered investigators want to tear their own carapaces off. She did not hide in some asteroid black site. She founded a company. She filed the paperwork. She paid the Concord's inspection fees and welcomed the inspectors and gave them tea. And she built her thing under a corporate charter, so boring that the Concord's watch analysts skimmed past it for 11 straight years. The company was called Threnody Logistics. Its stated purpose was the modeling, prediction, and optimization of interstellar supply networks, the deeply unglamorous work of figuring out how a grain shipment gets from a farm world to a hungry city 40 light-years away with the fewest wasted joules. It was the kind of company the Concord adored. It made the machinery of civilization run smoother. It had no hardpoints. It had no hull it could not fully account for. Its only products were numbers, forecasts, recommendations, the gentle grease of commerce. Kesa was 31 when she incorporated it. By then she had spent 16 years learning what her grandmother had known and everything her grandmother hadn't, and she had made herself into something the human worlds had produced only a handful of in their whole history. A person who understood, at once and in a single unified vision, both the physics of how a fleet moves and the far stranger physics of how a civilization decides. Because that was the true subject of Threnody Logistics, though it took the Concord more than a decade to understand it. Threnody did not model grain. Threnody modeled decision. It ingested the whole visible commerce of the galaxy, every shipping manifest, every price fluctuation, every reroute and delay and rumor of delay, all of it public, all of it legal, all of it freely filed with the Concord's own trade authority, and it built from that ocean of ordinary data a mirror. A living, breathing, predictive mirror of the galactic economy, so detailed and so accurate that Kesa Moreno's engine could tell you, 6 months in advance, which farm world's harvest would fail, which shipping lane would choke, which member species would face a lean winter and grow anxious and start looking for someone to blame. It was, on its face, the single most benevolent instrument ever constructed. It could see famine coming and root grain to stop it. It could see a shipping crisis forming and smooth it flat before anyone went hungry. In its first 3 years of operation, Threnody Logistics quietly prevented 4 regional food shortages, and the grateful governments of a dozen worlds gave Kesa Moreno medals she never wore. The Concord loved her. The Concord subsidized her. The Concord fed her data, gigantic torrents of it, because the more the engine saw, the better its forecasts became, and the better its forecasts became, the more famine it prevented. And what could possibly be dangerous about a machine whose only power was to know, a little in advance, what a civilization was about to need? The Concord had banned the sword and armored itself against every kind of blade. It had never once imagined that the thing it should fear was a mirror. Kesa was 41 the year the VTH Dominion came back. Not as they had been. The old Dominion was a corpse. Humanity had killed it in the territorial war, and the conquered had let it lie. But a corpse that large does not simply vanish. Its border territories had fractured into a dozen bitter successor states, and the largest and cruelest of these, the reformed VTH Ascendancy, had spent 40 years nursing its grievance in the dark and rebuilding its strength in secret, and it had come to a conclusion that the conquered found unthinkable precisely because the conquered was incapable of thinking it. The Ascendancy had studied the instrument of restraint the way a hungry thing studies a fence, and it had understood correctly that the fence had a gate the conquered itself had welded open. Humanity could not build warships. Therefore humanity could not defend the frontier. Therefore the human frontier world's bright fortune, Adami's reach, the long thin string of settlements out along the Perseus arm, were the softest targets in the settled galaxy. Rich, undefended, and legally forbidden from ever becoming anything else. The Ascendancy did not declare war. It was cleverer than the old Dominion had been. It began, instead, to press asterisk. A human freighter went missing in the Kesarine Deep, and the Ascendancy expressed formal regret and offered no explanation. A human survey team on the moon of Talent's world was found dead, and the Ascendancy condemned the tragedy and named no culprit. A human mining colony on the far edge of the arm simply stopped answering, and when a relief ship arrived the colony was empty, the atmosphere still breathing, the meals still warm on the tables, and 40,000 people gone as if they had been erased. Each incident alone was deniable. Together they were a message, and the message was written in the one language the conquered had forbidden humanity to answer in. You cannot build a warship. We know this. We wrote half the interdictions ourselves in the committee where we sat as observers. You cannot come and stop us. You can only file complaints. And we have all the time in the galaxy to take your worlds from you, one warm and empty colony at a time. The human worlds petitioned the conquered for protection. The conquered convened a committee. The committee scheduled hearings. The hearings were scheduled around the availability of 41 delegations, which meant they would begin in 14 months and conclude, if the Ascendancy was accommodating, sometime in the following decade. Bright Fortune Station, where an old blind woman named Kesa Moreno had died 3 years before, and where her granddaughter had learned to take the universe apart to see how it wanted to work, sat 40 light years from the Ascendancy's advancing edge, defended by nothing but the law. Kesa Moreno read the Ascendancy's deniable messages the way everyone else read them, and understood them the way everyone else understood them, and then she did the thing no one else in the galaxy was equipped to do. She fed them to the mirror. She took the missing freighter, the dead survey team, the erased colony, the timing, the locations, the market ripples that each one had sent shivering through the shipping lanes she watched, and she poured them into the engine she had spent 19 years building, the engine that already held a living model of the whole galactic economy, and she asked it a question it had never been asked before. She asked it, what does the reformed VTH Ascendancy need? Not what did it want. Wanting was easy. The Ascendancy wanted the human worlds. The engine already knew that. Kesa asked it something deeper and far more dangerous. She asked it to look at the Ascendancy the way it looked at everything, as a decision-making system embedded in an economy, a thing that ran on grain and fuel and ore and morale and the confidence of its own commanders, and to tell her the precise, specific, load-bearing points on which the entire edifice of the Ascendancy silently depended. The threads that, if pulled, would not damage the Ascendancy so much as unmake its ability to continue asterisk. The engine took 9 days. It was the longest single computation Threnody Logistics had ever run, and it cost more energy than the company usually spent in a year. And when it finished, it returned to Kesa Moreno not a battle plan but something stranger and quieter, and when she finally understood what she was looking at, so much worse. It returned a map of the enemy's mind. And Kesa Moreno, 41 years old, sitting alone in the small gray office where she had welcomed the Concord's inspectors and given them tea, looked at that map for a long time. Then she opened a private channel to the 11 surviving keel masters of the human worlds, the old ones, her grandmother's generation, the ones who had built the warships the galaxy had outlawed, and she said the thing that would end the peace and begin the age that came after it. She said, we're not going to build a warship. They're right that we can't. But I know how to build something they never thought to forbid, and I need you to trust me, because when they finally understand what it is, they are going to wish with everything they have that they had only let us build ships. The 11 keel masters came to Bright Fortune Station because Kesa asked them to, and because they were old, and because the old ones of the human worlds had spent 19 years watching the frontier bleed while the law told them to hold still, and they had reached the particular kind of fury that has gone quiet and patient and is only waiting to be pointed. They gathered in the machine hall her grandmother had once worked in, A vast cold space that had built warships in the war, and had been retooled after the instrument into a repair yard for cargo haulers. 11 old spacers, the youngest of them 60 and the oldest past 100, their hands scarred and their eyes sharp, sitting in a circle of cargo crates, while a woman younger than any of their children stood before them and told them she was going to save the frontier without a single gun. "You've all read the instrument," Kesa said. "Some of you helped write your names into it, signing away the right to build. So you know it better than anyone. Tell me what it bans." Old Tomas Vey, who had laid keels at Tycho beside Kesa's grandmother, spat on the deck. "Everything. It bans everything. Guns, armor, drives that turn too hard, reactors that push too hot. It bans the shape of a warship down to the rivet. There's nothing left, girl. That's the point of it. They didn't leave us anything." "They left us the whole galaxy," Kesa said. "They just took the swords." She brought up the display. She had thought a long time about how to show them, because they were engineers, hard, practical people who had spent their lives making metal do violence, and she was about to tell them that the most powerful weapon ever conceived was made of no metal at all. So she did not begin with the weapon. She began with a grain shipment. She showed them a single freighter carrying protein stock from the farm world of Serena to the industrial hub of Dross, a route her engine had watched 10,000 times. She showed them the price of protein stock on Dross and how it moved. She showed them what happened on Dross when the price of protein stock rose by 9%, how the Dockworkers Guild grew restless, how the shift managers cut portions, how a particular kind of low, simmering anger spread through a particular quarter of the city where the workers who could least afford it lived. "Now watch," she said. "What happens on Dross if that one freighter is 3 days late?" She ran it forward. The keel masters watched the price twitch, the guild stir, the anger bloom a little brighter. Nothing dramatic, a bad week on a distant world. "Now watch what happens," Kesa said softly. "If I know 6 weeks in advance that this freighter will be 3 days late, because I can see the fuel shortage forming on its refueling stop before the captain can, and I let it happen. And I do the same to 40 other freighters, chosen not at random but chosen precisely, each one a thread, each delay landing on exactly the world and exactly the week where it will do the most. Watch what happens to Dross then. Watch what happens to the 6 worlds around Dross. Watch what happens to the confidence of the people who govern them." She ran it forward, and the machine hall went very quiet. Because on the display, without a single weapon fired, without a single law broken, without a single act that any inspector could point to and call an attack, a regional economy was coming apart. Not with a bang. With 1,000 small correct nudges, each one legal, each one invisible, each one landing exactly where 19 years of watching the galaxy breathe had taught the engine it would land. Prices spiraled. Guilds struck. Governments that had been stable for centuries began, on the display, to fracture along the hidden fault lines the engine had found, the resentments, the dependencies, the quiet assumptions that the whole apparatus rested on, and that no one had ever thought to defend because no one had ever imagined they could be attacked. "You're not moving ships," said a keel master named Andrel, her voice careful. "You're not blockading, you're just letting things be late." "I'm not letting anything be anything," Kesa said. "I'm doing nothing at all. Threnody Logistics is a shipping optimizer. Every day it sends out 10 million recommendations. Take this route, delay that shipment, wait for a better fuel price. Every one of them is legal. Every one of them is, in isolation, good advice. Half the galaxy's commerce runs on my recommendations now, because they subsidized me and fed me their data and let me become the grease in their gears. What I'm showing you is what happens when the grease decides to become sand, slowly, deniably. In a pattern only one machine in the galaxy can see." Tomas Vey stared at the display where a civilization was quietly strangling. "The conquered will call it an act of war." "Let them find the war," Kesa said. "Let them find the weapon. Let them send inspectors to Threnody Logistics. They've been coming for years. I give them tea and let them audit every recommendation, and they'll find that each one is defensible, ordinary, the kind of advice any logistics firm might give. There is no weapon here, Keelmaster. There's only knowledge. I know the galaxy better than the galaxy knows itself, and knowledge is the one thing they forgot to ban. Andro leaned forward. You said you needed us. If it's all numbers, if it's all your engine, what do you need 11 old shipwrights for? And here Kesa Moreno hesitated for the first time, because here was the part that made it real, the part that made it more than a demonstration on a screen. She had shown them what the mirror could do to an economy. Now she had to show them what she meant to do with it, and she had to ask them to help her build the body it would need. Because the engine isn't the weapon, she said. The engine is the *aim*. The weapon is what I point it through. And I need to build that, and it needs to be a thing the conquered will look at and see nothing to fear. And it needs to be able to survive out there on the frontier where the ascendancy is erasing our colonies one warm, empty room at a time. I need a hull, a big one, the biggest thing our worlds have built since the war. And I need it to be, in every line and every rivet, the most obviously harmless vessel the Concord's inspectors have ever laid their eyes on. She brought up the second display, and the keelmasters saw, for the first time, the shape of the thing that history would remember. It was not a warship. That was the first thing, the overwhelming thing, the thing that made old Tomas Vey narrow his eyes and lean back. It had no lines of a warship at all. It was vast, larger than any battleship the war had produced, larger than anything in the Concord's own fleets. But it was soft-edged, bulbous, almost gentle, a great pale whale of a hull studded not with weapon housings but with sensor blisters and communication arrays, and the wide, gentle bays of a survey and relief vessel. It looked, Kesa had made sure it looked, exactly like what she would tell the Concord it was. The largest mobile logistics and humanitarian coordination platform ever conceived. A hospital, a granary, a relay station, a thing to help asterisk. It's a listening post, Andro breathed, reading the arrays. That's not a sensor suite for a survey ship. That's how much is it listening to. Everything, Kesa said. Every shipping band, every commercial channel, every price feed, every navigation beacon in half the arm. It doesn't need to fire anything. It needs to hear asterisk. It's the engine's eyes and ears, moved out to the frontier where the fighting is, so that the mirror is no longer looking at the galaxy from an office on Bright Fortune. It's looking at the ascendancy from 6 light towers away, in real time, hearing every fuel order and every troop rotation, and every nervous message their commanders send. And it's turning all of that into knowledge faster than they can generate it. And then, said Tomas Vey, you hear them, you know them. Then what? You make their grain late. You strangle a few of their worlds. They have 100 worlds, girl. They have a war fleet. You can inconvenience an empire. You can't beat one with late shipments. Kesa Moreno looked at the old man who had built the ships that won the last war, and she said the sentence that changed his face. I don't need to beat them, Keelmaster. I need them to understand that I could. Force wins a battle. Knowing wins the war before it starts. When I'm finished, the Ascendancy's high command will wake up one morning and discover that I know their supply state better than their own quartermasters do. That I know which of their admirals is lying to the throne about his readiness. That I know the exact week their Eastern fleet will run out of reactor coolant, because I've been watching the ore that makes it move through the lanes for 2 years. That I can reach into their empire and stop a thing or start a thing, or whisper the truth into the right ear at the right moment, and there is nothing they can do to stop me, because they can't find the weapon, because the weapon is that I understand them. And a people who realize their enemy understands them completely, and that they understand their enemy not at all, that people does not fight. That people stops, because continuing has become the most terrifying thing they can imagine. The machine hall was silent for a long moment. Then old Tomas Vey, who had buried more friends than he could count, who had signed his name into the instrument that outlawed his life's work, began, very slowly, to smile. "They banned the sword," he said. "And you built a thing that makes the sword unnecessary." "I built a thing that makes the * war unnecessary," Kesa said. "The sword was always just a way to get here. They took the loud road away from us. So we're going to take the quiet one, and we're going to walk it all the way to the end. And when they finally look up and see how far we've come, it's going to be far too late to build a wall across the door." They called it the Cassandra asterisk. Kesa named it over the objections of the keel masters, who thought it bad luck to name a ship after a prophet no one believed. But Kesa had read the old stories, the human ones, the ones from before the stars, and she said the name fit better than they knew. Cassandra was cursed to see the future perfectly and to be believed by no one. The Cassandra would see the future perfectly, and it would make certain this was the whole design of the thing that its enemies believed it completely and far too late. The build took 2 years. It should have taken 6, but the human worlds were frightened now, truly frightened. The erased colonies piling up on the frontier and the Concord's committee still 14 months from its first hearing. And when 11 old keel masters put out the quiet word that something was being built and that hands were needed, the hands came. They came from the mothballed yards and the retirement habitats and the freight lines. They came old and slow and scarred, the last generation that remembered how to build big, and they taught their grandchildren as they worked. And the machine hall on Bright Fortune Station roared back to life for the first time in 19 years. The Concord's inspectors came too, of course. They came often, because a hull that large could not be hidden, and Kesa did not try to hide it. She filed the plans. She filed them in full, every deck and every system, because the genius of the Cassandra was that there was nothing in those plans to hide. An inspector could read every line and find no weapon, because there was no weapon. There was sensor gear, vast amounts of it, all of it legal, all of it civilian rated, all of it exactly what a humanitarian coordination platform on a dangerous frontier would plausibly want. There was computing capacity, enormous amounts of it, which Kesa explained as necessary for real-time relief logistics across a war-torn arm, and which was, in a strict technical sense, true. There was communications equipment powerful enough to talk to every ship in a quarter of the galaxy at once, which the inspectors noted, and which Kesa explained, patiently, over tea, as the coordination backbone the frontier so desperately needed. The chief inspector was a Sithka named Voral Sunt, thorough and dry and not a fool, and Voral Sunt walked the decks of the half-built asterisk Cassandra 4 separate times over the 2 years, and each time left more unsettled than the last and could never say why. Because everything checked. Every component was legal. Every system had a benign explanation. The Cassandra mounted not one weapon that violated the instrument of restraint, not 1 gram of armor over the threshold, not one directed energy emitter above the defensive line. And yet, on Voral Sunt's 4th inspection, standing in the vast dim cathedral of the Cassandra *S primary computing core, a space the size of a small cathedral, packed floor to ceiling with processing lattice, humming with a sound like the sea, the inspector turned to Kesa Moreno and asked the question that no one at the Concord had thought to ask in 11 years. "Dr. Moreno, I have inspected this vessel 4 times. I can certify, and I will certify, that it violates no clause of the instrument. It carries no weapon, and I find that I am more afraid of it than I have ever been of any warship I have ever seen, and I do not know why. So I am going to ask you plainly, engineer to inspector, off the record and between the two of us, what is this thing?" And Kesa Moreno, who never lied to the inspectors because the truth was so much more useful, looked up at the humming lattice that held the mirror of the galaxy, and she told Voral Sunt the exact truth, knowing the inspector would not believe her until it was much too late. It's a machine for ending wars, she said. Not for winning them, for ending them. Your people wrote a very precise definition of a sword, Inspector, and then you spent 11 years congratulating yourselves that we couldn't build one. But you never wrote down what a sword is asterisk for asterisk. A sword is for making your enemy stop. And it turns out there are a great many ways to make an enemy stop, and force is only the loudest of them, and the loudest is not the strongest. This ship is going to make the reformed VTH ascendancy stop. It is going to do it without firing a shot. And when it is done, Inspector, your Concord is going to convene an emergency session, and you are going to try to write a new law banning what I have built, and you are going to discover the most terrible thing of all. Which is, said Voralsunt very quietly. That you cannot ban it, Kesa said, without banning knowledge itself, because that is all it is. It knows, that's the whole weapon. It knows the galaxy better than the galaxy knows itself, and it will never once break your law, and you will spend 100 years trying to write a clause that outlaws understanding your enemy too well. And you will fail, because the moment you write that clause, you have made it a crime to be wise. And you will not do that. You are too civilized to do that. And so you will have to live in a galaxy where we walk free with the one weapon you cannot take from us, and you will have handed it to us yourselves, in the very treaty you signed to keep us weak. Voralsunt did not certify the asterisk Cassandra that day. The inspector stood in the humming dark for a long time, and then left the ship, and went back to the Concord, and asked for an emergency closed hearing. But the Concord's committees moved at the speed of 41 delegations, and the frontier was burning, and the Cassandra was 3 months from completion. The hearing was scheduled for the following year. The Cassandra left dock on a day the human worlds would afterward mark as the turning, though no one who watched it go understood what they were watching. What they saw was a great pale vessel, soft and round and gentle, sliding out of the bright fortune cradle with none of the menace of the old warships. It carried no guns to gleam. It made no show of power. It simply moved, enormous and slow and serene, out past the station and into the dark, trailing its clouds of sensor drones like a whale trailing plankton, and it turned its blunt nose toward the frontier where the ascendancy was pressing, and it went. Children waved at it. It looked like a thing that had come to help. Kesa Moreno was aboard. She had not planned to be, the Cassandra could run itself, was built to run itself, needed her physically no more than a telescope needs the astronomer to sit inside the lens. But she would not send 11 old keel masters and their grandchildren out to the frontier on a thing she had built and stay safe on the station herself. And so she went. And she took the primary chair in the great humming cathedral of the computing core, and when the Cassandra reached the edge of the contested zone, she woke the mirror up and let it look at the enemy for the first time with its own eyes. It was like watching a blind thing be given sight. For 19 years the engine had modeled the galaxy from a distance, working off public data days or weeks old, inferring the present from the recent past. Now it sat 6 light towers from the ascendancy's forward staging worlds, and it heard everything. Every fuel requisition passed in the clear because the ascendancy had never imagined anyone was listening at this depth. Every navigation beacon, every commercial transponder from the merchant traffic that fed the war machine, every burst of encrypted command traffic, which the Cassandra could not read, but did not need to read, because the engine had learned long ago that you do not need to know what a message says if you can see who sent it and when and to whom and what they did afterward. Volume. Timing, pattern, the shape of a thing in the dark traced by everything around it. Within a week, the mirror knew the ascendancy's forward supply state better than the ascendancy's own logistics core. Within a month, it knew which of the 3 staging fleets was quietly short of reactor coolant, because it had watched the coolantor not arrive, and had watched the merchant captains who usually carried it take other contracts, and had watched the price of coolant on the ascendancy's black markets creep up in the particular way that meant a shortage the high command did not yet know it had. Within 2 months, Kesa Moreno knew the reformed VTH ascendancy, the way she knew the layout of her grandmother's kitchen. And she did not strike. That was the discipline of it, the thing that made the Cassandra asterisk something the conquered had no framework to comprehend. A warship, arriving at the frontier, would have fought. It would have found the enemy and traded fire, and won or lost, and either way announced itself. The Cassandra did nothing. It sat, pale and gentle and harmless, at the edge of the contested zone, filing daily humanitarian reports with the conquered, coordinating actual relief for actual refugees. That was real. Kesa made sure it was real. The Cassandra saved 11,000 displaced colonists in its first 3 months, and the conquered commended it. And it listened, and it learned, and it waited for the enemy to make the mistake that would let it begin. The mistake came in the 4th month. It always came, the engine had told Kesa. A pressing empire cannot help but press, and pressure leaves prints. The ascendancy moved to erase another human colony. A place called Halloran's Landing, 9,000 souls, a farming settlement on the inner edge of the contested zone. The engine saw it coming 11 days out, saw the ascendancy's covert squadron detach from its staging world, saw the fuel it took on, saw the exact vector, saw the whole quiet murderous operation assemble itself out of 100 small signals the way a face assembles out of 100 small shadows. The old Kesa the conquered feared, would have sent a warship to meet that squadron and destroy it. She had no warship, she had something else. She had 11 days, and she had the mirror, and she had a map of the enemy's mind. She did not warn Halloran's Landing to run. The engine calculated that a visible evacuation would only tell the ascendancy that its operations were being watched, and would cost her the far greater prize. Instead, she reached into the ascendancy's own supply network, the network she had been silently mapping for 2 years, the network that ran on the shipping lanes she controlled the grease of, and she made 3 things happen, each of them small, each of them legal, each of them deniable, each of them landing exactly where 19 years of watching had taught her it would land. She did not attack the squadron. She made the squadron asterisk disbelieve itself. First thread. A fuel depot the squadron was counting on for its return leg suddenly, and for entirely commercial reasons that Threnody Logistics could document in exhaustive innocent detail, rerouted its reserves to a higher-paying contract 3 systems away. Legal. Ordinary. The kind of thing that happened 1,000 times a day. But the squadron's commander now faced a return trip without a guaranteed refuel, and a covert operation with no fuel margin is a dead operation, and he knew it. The second thread, a rumor. Not a lie. Kesa never used lies. Lies could be traced and disproved. A truth released at the perfect moment. The engine had known for 6 weeks that one of the ascendancy's 3 staging admirals was falsifying his readiness reports to the throne, claiming ships fit for battle that sat crippled in dock. It was true. Kesa had the merchant traffic patterns to prove it. She did not send that truth to the throne. She sent it, through 6 untraceable commercial cutouts, to the admiral's rivals, and let the ascendancy's own high command begin, that very week, to tear at itself over who was lying, so that no admiral dared commit to any operation lest his readiness be the next to be examined. The third thread was the one that made the keel masters go pale when Kesa explained it, because the third thread was aimed not at the squadron or the fuel or the admirals, but at the single point on which the whole covert campaign against the human world silently depended, the load-bearing thread the engine had found on the very first day, and had waited 4 months to pull. The whole strategy of erasing human colonies rested on deniability. Each vanished colony was a message precisely because it could not be proven. The ascendancy could keep pressing forever as long as no one could prove it was pressing. The moment the erasures could be proven, the whole calculus inverted. A provable campaign of extermination against a conquered protected people was the one thing that would force even the conquered's glacial committees to act, would turn the frontier from a quiet feast into an open war the ascendancy was not ready to fight. The engine had understood this from the beginning. And so, 11 days out, with the squadron already moving on Halloran's Landing, Kesa Moreno did the thing that ended the ascendancy's whole strategy in a single stroke. She let them arrive. She let the squadron reach Halloran's Landing. And she made certain, with a quiet fleet of civilian sensor drones, the Cassandra had been seeding across the contested zone for months, all legal, all humanitarian, all just watching for refugees, that the entire operation was recorded in flawless, uneditable, multiply-witness detail. Every ship, every marking, every order given in the clear by a squadron that had never once imagined it was being watched at this depth. And then, the instant the recording was complete and before a single colonist was harmed, she released it, not to the Concord's committee, to everyone. To every world, every network, every commercial channel in half the galaxy at once, through the same communications backbone that made the Cassandra look so harmless. A full, undeniable, proof beyond argument record of the reformed VTH ascendancy caught in the act. Its deniability gone forever in a single instant. Its whole patient 2-year campaign of quiet murder made suddenly, catastrophically loud. Halloran's Landing was not erased. The squadron, arriving to find itself already exposed to the entire galaxy, its fuel margin gone, its high command paralyzed by internal accusation, did the only thing left to it. It turned around and ran home, having accomplished nothing except to be the ship that got the whole empire caught. And the Concord, which could ignore a committee's worth of unprovable complaints for a decade, could not ignore proof broadcast to 41 member species simultaneously. The emergency session convened not the following year, but within the week. And the topic was no longer the Cassandra asterisk. The topic was the ascendancy's exposed campaign of extermination, and what the Concord was going to do about it. Kesa Moreno had not fired a shot. She had won a battle for a human colony, exposed an enemy empire, and forced the Concord's hand, all in 11 days with nothing but knowledge, released at the right moment in the right place to the right ears. And she was just beginning. The ascendancy's high command did what cornered empires do. It escalated. They understood now that they were being watched. The exposure of Halloran's Landing could not be explained any other way. But they did not understand how asterisk, and they did not understand how much asterisk, and this was the trap Kesa had built into the whole design. They knew there was a watcher. They assumed it was a spy network, informants, a leak in their own ranks. So they did what empires do to leaks. They purged. They arrested. They tortured. They tore apart their own intelligence core looking for the human agents who had exposed them. And of course they found none, because there were none. Because the Watcher was a pale, gentle ship 6 light hours away that had never sent a single agent into their space and never needed to. And every arrest, every purge, every paranoid accusation, the mirror saw and fed on and grew stronger. Because a purging empire generates data like a wound generates heat. The engine watched the ascendancy's high command devour its own intelligence core, and from the pattern of who was arrested and who was spared it read the internal politics of the throne like a book, and it learned things the ascendancy's own emperor did not know about who was loyal to him and who was not. Kesa let it run 6 weeks, then she pulled the second great thread. She had a truth she had been holding. The engine had found it in the 3rd month, and she had waited, because a weapon released too early is a weapon wasted. The ascendancy's war economy, the whole vast machine that fed its fleets, depended on a single strategic material, a rare stabilizing isotope, mined on only 4 worlds, without which the ascendancy's reactor cascades could not sustain the high output that warships required. 4 worlds. The engine had mapped the entire supply chain, every mine, every refinery, every shipping lane, and it had found. This was the thing Kesa had been holding. That 3 of the 4 mining worlds were operated not by the ascendancy directly, but by a consortium of neutral commercial houses who sold to the ascendancy purely for profit, and who did not care in the slightest which side of the frontier their isotope went to. Kesa did not blockade the mines. She could not. She had no warship. She did something the engine had calculated would be far more effective and entirely legal. She made the isotope more profitable to sell to the human worlds. Threnody Logistics, the beloved humanitarian logistics firm, announced a major new long-term purchasing contract for the stabilizing isotope at prices well above what the ascendancy paid, funded by the pooled treasuries of the frightened human worlds who now understood exactly what Kesa was doing and would have given her anything she asked. The neutral consortium, being commercial and rational, sold to the higher bidder. Legal. Ordinary. The free market at work, the very thing the conquered most cherished. And the reformed VTH ascendancy, 6 months later, found its reactor coolant and its stabilizing isotope both running dry at once, its war fleets forced to throttle down from battle output to a fraction of their power, not because anyone had attacked them, not because anyone had blockaded them, but because a shipping company had outbid them for their own strategic materials, and there was not one clause in the instrument of restraint, not one law in the entire body of conquered jurisprudence, that made it illegal to pay more for something than your enemy does asterisk. The ascendancy's war fleet, the great hammer it had spent 40 years forging to break the human worlds, sat crippled in its docks, starved of the materials that made it strong, and its admirals looked at each other and understood, slowly and with mounting dread, that they were being disassembled by an enemy they could not find, could not fight, and could not even prove was doing anything at all. The Concord's emergency session ran for 4 months, and it did not accomplish what the Concord intended. It had convened to deal with the ascendancy, to censure the exposed empire, to debate sanctions, to perform the long, slow rituals of collective disapproval that the Concord mistook for action. But the ascendancy's ambassador, a cold and clever creature named HFY, stood before the 41 delegations and did something no one expected. He did not defend the exterminations. He could not. The proof was too total. Instead, he pointed at the human delegation, and he told the conquered a truth so unwelcome that the chamber fell into a silence 9,000 years deep. You banned their warships, HFY said, and you called it mercy, and you told yourselves you had made them safe to keep. And now I stand before you, my empire's war fleet crippled in its docks, my supply chains unraveling, my high command tearing itself apart over leaks it cannot find, and not one human hand has touched us. Not one law has been broken. I have brought my jurists. They have examined everything. Every isotope contract is legal. Every shipping recommendation is legal. Every sensor drone is a licensed humanitarian instrument. There is no weapon. There is no attack. There is only a ship, a hospital ship, they call it, a granary sitting at the edge of our space, doing nothing, breaking nothing, and dismantling my empire. He turned slowly, and his cold gaze swept the 41 delegations. You banned the sword. I ask you now, honored delegates, to look at what they built instead and to tell me which of you feels safer. Which of you, hearing what this thing has done to me in a single year, does not wonder what it already knows about you? It sits on our frontier now, but it is a ship. It can move, and its weapon is knowledge, and knowledge respects no border. You fed it your data for 11 years. You subsidized it. You made yourselves transparent to it in the name of preventing famine. Ask yourselves, honored delegates, if the humans wished it tomorrow, how many of your strategic materials could a shipping company outbid you for? How many of your generals are lying to their thrones in ways this machine already knows? You did not disarm humanity. You taught it that the loud weapons were beneath its notice. And now it holds a quiet one against the throat of the entire galaxy, and you handed it the blade yourselves. It was the most effective speech an enemy of humanity ever gave, and it very nearly worked because it was true. The conquered recoiled. Delegations who had regarded Kesa Moreno as a benefactor now looked at the reports coming off the frontier and felt the ground shift beneath them. The engine that had prevented their famines could, they understood all at once, cause them. The mirror that saw their needs could see their weaknesses. And the Cassandra Asterisk, the harmless pale ship they had certified and commended, was revealed in the cold light of Hesheruk's speech as the single most dangerous vessel any species had ever built, more dangerous than any battleship, precisely because no law could touch it and no fleet could stop it and no border could keep it out. The motion came fast, an emergency amendment to the instrument of restraint. A new prohibition, drafted in a frenzy over 11 sleepless days by the Concord's finest jurists, aimed squarely at the thing Kesa Moreno had built. And it was in the drafting of that amendment that the Concord discovered the trap it had walked into, the trap Kesa had described to Voral Sunt in the humming dark of the computing core a year before, the trap that was the true and final design of the Asterisk Cassandra Asterisk. They could not write the clause. They tried. God, they tried. They sat in committee and attempted to define in law the thing that must be banned, but every definition they reached for dissolved in their hands. Banned strategic economic modeling. Half the Concord's own economies ran on it. The Scythka trade combines would collapse without their forecasting engines. Banned the purchase of strategic materials above market rate. That was simply commerce. Outlawing it would freeze every legitimate transaction in the galaxy. Ban the operation of large sensor arrays near contested zones. Their own navies would be the first to violate it. Ban the broadcasting of true recordings of atrocities. They could not possibly make it a crime to prove a war crime. Ban predictive analysis of an enemy's supply state. That was the definition of military intelligence. Every fleet in the Concord did it. They would be outlawing the act of asterisk knowing your enemy asterisk. Every wall they tried to build across the door, they found their own people standing in the doorway. Because Kesa Moreno had built her weapon out of the ordinary machinery of civilization itself. She had taken the things every advanced society did: model, forecast, purchase, sense, broadcast, understand, and she had done them all better than anyone else. And she had pointed them at an enemy, and there was no way to outlaw what she had done without outlawing the foundations of the Concord's own existence. To ban the Asterisk Cassandra was to ban knowing too much, and no civilization can make it a crime to be too wise without ceasing, in that moment, to be a civilization at all. Voral Sunt, called to testify before the drafting committee, said it plainest, and the record preserved it. You are trying to write a law against understanding, the Scythka inspector told the assembled jurists. I have inspected that ship 4 times. There is nothing on it to ban. The weapon is not aboard the vessel. The weapon is in the mind of the woman who built it, and in the machine she taught to think like her, and you cannot legislate against a mind. You banned their swords 11 years ago, and you were so proud of your definition of a sword. Read it again. It is 11,000 clauses long, and it describes, in perfect detail, everything a human is forbidden to build, and every single clause is a thing made of metal that fires or shields or strikes. Not one clause in all 11,000 imagined that the most dangerous thing a species can build is not a weapon at all. It is a way of seeing, and you cannot ban sight. You can only close your own eyes and hope. They did not close their eyes. They did something worse, from Kesa's point of view, and something she had planned for anyway, because the mirror had shown her this branch of the future too. They tried to seize the Asterisk Cassandra Asterisk. A Concord enforcement squadron, 9 warships, real warships, the kind the Concord was still permitted to build, arrived at the frontier under a writ of emergency preservation, empowered to take custody of the Cassandra pending the resolution of the legal question. It was not a legal act, quite. The amendment had not passed, could not pass, and seizing a vessel that had broken no law was a naked violation of the very rule of law the Concord claimed to embody. But the Concord was frightened, and frightened powers reach for force, because force is the thing they understand. The 9 warships arrived to find the asterisk Cassandra exactly where it had always been, pale and gentle and unarmed, doing nothing. It made no move to run. It mounted no weapon to fight. It could not have fought if it wished to. It was, in the most literal sense the instrument required, defenseless. The squadron commander, a stern old Katai named Admiral Vassarin, opened a channel and ordered the Cassandra asterisk to power down its systems and prepare to be boarded. And Kesa Moreno, sitting in the humming cathedral of the computing core, answered him herself. "Admiral Vassarin," she said, "before you board, I want you to know 3 things, and then you may do exactly as you judge best, and I will not resist you, because I cannot and because I do not need to. The first thing: your squadron's flagship, the asterisk Endurance of Reason, is running on a reactor whose primary coolant loop developed a hairline stress fracture during your transit here. Your engineers have not found it yet. It is on the ventral manifold 3rd junction. I know this because I watched the coolant pressure telemetry that your ship broadcasts in the clear to your fleet tender, and the pattern is unmistakable. You have perhaps 40 hours before it becomes critical. I am telling you this to save your crew's lives, and I am telling you now, before you board me, so that you understand what I mean when I say I know things. The second thing: 2 of your 9 ships are here under protest. Their captains believe this seizure is unlawful, and they are correct. I know which 2, because I have watched the command traffic between your ships since you crossed into this zone, and the timing and volume of their exchanges with your flagship tells me everything I need to know about who is arguing with you and who is not. I will not name them. I am telling you that I could, so that you understand that I know your own fleet's mind better than you do. And the third thing, Admiral, is the only one that matters. I am not going to stop you. Board me. Seize the ship. Take the computing core apart deck by deck, and you will find nothing but processing lattice and public data, all of it legal, and you will be able to charge me with nothing. But understand what you will have done. You will have proven, to all 41 species of your conquered, that the thing I built could not be stopped by law, and so had to be stopped by force applied outside the law. You will have proven that your rules protect you only until you are afraid, and then they protect no one. Every small world in this galaxy is watching this moment, Admiral. Every people who ever feared the Conquered's power. And they are about to learn whether the Conquered is a rule of law or merely a rule of the strong pretending to be law. Board me, and you tell them it is the latter. And then they will all, every one of them, start building what I built. Because I have shown them that it works, and that you cannot ban it, and that the only answer you have to it is the lawless force you swore you had outgrown. I built 1 asterisk Cassandra asterisk Admiral. Seize it lawlessly, and you will build 1,000 in 1,000 frightened harbors, aimed in 1,000 directions, and not one of them at your command. That is the galaxy you make if you board me. So, the reactor fracture is real, and your crew's lives depend on it, and I have told you the truth about it as a gift. Now decide what kind of Conquered you serve." There was a long silence on the channel. Then Admiral Vassarin, who was old and stern and not a fool, ordered his engineers to check the ventral manifold 3rd junction. And they found the fracture, exactly where she had said, 40 hours from critical. And Admiral Vassarin did not board the asterisk Cassandra asterisk. He withdrew his squadron to repair his flagship, and he sent to the Conquered a report that would be argued over for a century, and its central sentence was this: "I was sent to seize a ship that has broken no law, and I found that I could not do so without breaking the law myself, and I found that the ship knew this before I did." There is a story the human worlds tell about the middle years of the campaign, the long quiet stretch between the exposure of Halloran's landing and the day the Ascendancy's fleet stopped 41 days from the frontier. And it is worth telling because it is the story of the moment Kesa Moreno very nearly lost everything, and it explains why she was so certain at the end of what a cornered people would do. It happened in the 12th month, when the Ascendancy, unable to find the watcher, made an attempt to poison the mirror itself. They could not find the Cassandra *S method, but they had deduced its nature. Something was reading their supply lines, their traffic, their commerce, and turning it into knowledge. They did not know it was a ship on their frontier. They assumed it was an analytical engine somewhere in human space, fed by spies. And so, being clever in the way that cruel empires are clever, they decided that if they could not blind the eye, they would feed it lies. They would flood the commercial channels with false manifests, phantom shipments, fabricated fuel orders, an ocean of counterfeit data designed to make the mirror see an ascendancy that did not exist, to make Kesa Moreno act on a picture that was false, to lure her into a mistake that would expose her method or waste her strength. It was a good plan. Against almost any analyst it would have worked, and for 11 days aboard the Cassandra *, it very nearly did. The engine began to return contradictions. The picture of the ascendancy that had been so clear for a year began to blur, to double, to show two overlapping empires where there should have been one. The keel masters watched Kesa go pale over the readouts, watched her run the same query 9 different ways and get 9 different answers, watched the mirror, the perfect mirror, the thing she had spent 19 years building, begin to lie to her, and none of them understood why, least of all Kesa. Old Tomas Vey found her in the computing core on the 4th night, not sleeping, staring at the humming lattice with the particular stillness of a person who has begun to doubt the one thing they were sure of. "It's wrong," she said without turning. "Everything it's showing me is wrong, and I can't tell where the wrongness starts. They've done something, I don't know what. And if I act on this, I'll act on a lie, and I'll expose the whole method, and everything we built comes apart." Tomas Vey sat down beside her, an old man who had built ships that fought with fire, and he said the thing that a fire and steel engineer understood better than the woman who had left fire behind. "When I built a warship, girl, and the enemy jammed my sensors, I didn't try to see through the jamming. Couldn't be done. What I did was ask a different question. I stopped asking where is the enemy, and I started asking why is he jamming me here and not their asterisk. The jamming told me more than the sensor ever would have. The lie has a shape. Find the shape of the lie, and you've found the thing they're hiding behind it." And Kesa Moreno sat up, very slowly, because the old keel master had just handed her the answer she had been too close to see. She stopped asking the engine to tell her the truth about the ascendancy. She asked it instead to map the lies, to find every manifest that did not quite cohere, every fuel order that did not match the ship that supposedly placed it, every phantom shipment that appeared from nowhere and went nowhere. And when she laid that map over the real one, the counterfeit data was not noise. It was a signal. Because to fabricate a convincing false picture, the ascendancy had had to build it around the truth. The lies clustered thickest exactly where the truth was most sensitive, where they most needed to hide something, where the real supply state was most desperate. The ascendancy, trying to blind the mirror, had drawn it a map of its own deepest fears in the very act of trying to conceal them. The engine had not been poisoned. It had been told where to look . Kesa spent the next 6 days reading the shape of the lie, and by the 11th day she knew the ascendancy better than she had before the deception began, because a people reveals what it treasures by what it works hardest to hide. And she understood in that moment the deepest law of the weapon she had built, the law she would carry all the way to the end of the war. You cannot lie to a mirror, you can only show it more of yourself. Every counterfeit manifest was a confession. Every false order was a fingerprint. An enemy who acts against you must act, and to act is to generate data, and to a machine that reads pattern rather than content, the very effort to deceive is the loudest signal of all. The ascendancy had learned this at ruinous cost, that against the Cassandra *, doing nothing was the only safety, and doing nothing was the one thing a cornered empire could not bring itself to do. Attack the mirror and you feed it. Flee the mirror, and you trace yourself across its sensors. Deceive the mirror, and you hand it a map of your own heart. There was no move against it that was not, in the end, a move that revealed you further. It was a weapon that grew stronger the more you struggled against it, and weaker only if you left it alone, and no enemy who feared it enough to fight it could ever bring themselves to leave it alone. That was the 12th month, and it was the month Kesa Moreno stopped being afraid. Because she understood then that the Cassandra could not truly be beaten, not by force and not by deception and not by law, and that its enemies would exhaust themselves proving it, each defeat teaching them a lesson they were incapable of learning, that the only way to be safe from a people who understood you completely was to give them nothing to understand, and that no living empire could ever go that still. The conquered, for its part, spent the years after the ascendancy's surrender in a slow and painful reckoning, and the shape of that reckoning is the last thing worth recording, because it is the shape of the whole galaxy that came after. They had convened in the end, not one emergency session, but a permanent standing commission, tasked with answering a question that had no answer. What does a civilization do when its most dangerous adversary breaks no law? For 9,000 years, the conquered had held its peace by holding a monopoly on legitimate force, and by writing careful laws about who could build the instruments of force, and by trusting that whoever controlled the loud weapons controlled the outcome. The Cassandra had dissolved that entire architecture in a single year, and left the conquered standing in the ruins of its own theory of power, holding 11,000 exquisitely useless interdictions against a kind of weapon it had never imagined and could not prohibit. Some of the delegations argued for accommodation, for embracing the new age, for building their own mirrors, for a galaxy in which power flowed from understanding rather than from armament, which many of them, quietly, thought might be an improvement. War by knowledge, after all, killed no one. The ascendancy had surrendered with its fleet intact and its worlds unburned, having lost nothing but its ability to believe it could win. A galaxy that fought with mirrors instead of guns might be a gentler galaxy, if a stranger and more transparent one, a galaxy in which the great secret weapon was simply to understand your neighbor too well to fear him. Others argued for terror, for the recognition that a weapon which could not be banned in the hands of humanity could not be banned in the hands of anyone, that the small worlds building mirrors in their frightened harbors were building the instruments of a chaos no one could control, that a galaxy where every people could reach into every other people's deepest secrets was a galaxy with no privacy, no security, no safe darkness in which a nation could simply be itself unwatched. They were not wrong either. The age of the mirror was not a comfortable one. Its only defense was to have nothing to hide, and no civilization in 9,000 years had ever managed that. The Commission never resolved the argument. It could not. There was no resolution to be had. The galaxy simply became the thing it had become, and lived inside the change it could not undo. And the Standing Commission met, year after year, and produced report after report. And in the archives of the conquered, those reports form a single long meditation on one theme, stated most clearly in the final entry that Voral Sunt, very old by then, submitted before retiring from the service. We asked at the start what a civilization does when its adversary breaks no law. We spent 40 years failing to answer it, and I believe now that the failure was the answer. There is nothing to be done. You cannot outlaw wisdom. You cannot ban sight. You cannot make it a crime to understand your enemy too well, because the day you do, you have made wisdom itself a weapon of the state, and no free people survives that. The humans did not defeat us. They showed us a door we had left open for 9,000 years and never walked through, because we had always had guns and never needed to. And now the door is open for everyone, and the galaxy is a stranger and more honest and more frightening place, and there is no closing it, and I find at the end of my long life that I am not entirely sorry. We banned their warships to keep them small. We should have known better. You do not make a people small by taking their weapons. You only teach them that the weapons were never the thing that made them large. That is the reckoning, and it is still going on in a galaxy full of mirrors, in which no empire dares to press upon a weaker neighbor anymore, because it can never be certain that the weaker neighbor does not already know its every secret, does not already hold, somewhere in a pale and gentle ship, the one thread that will unmake it. The long peace that the conquered had tried and failed to secure by banning weapons came, in the end, from the opposite thing entirely, from the terrible transparency of a galaxy where everyone could be understood, and so no one could safely be a predator, and the loud age of force gave way to the quiet age of knowing, and the human worlds, who had been leashed to keep them harmless, sat at the center of it all, having built the one weapon that could never be taken back. The reformed VTH ascendancy made its final decision in the 18th month, and it made it the way desperate empires always do, which is to say, it made the worst possible choice for the most understandable reasons. Its war fleet was crippled, throttled down for one of the isotope Kesa had outbid them for. Its high command was fractured, its intelligence core gutted by its own purges, its deniability gone forever since Halloran's landing. Every quiet lever it reached for turned to water in its hand, because the mirror saw the reaching and closed the lever first. It was being disassembled, patiently and legally and invisibly, and it could not find the enemy, and it could not fight the enemy, and it could not even prove the enemy existed. So the Ascendancy's emperor, a proud old creature named VTH Surin, who had spent 40 years dreaming of the day his fleets would break the human worlds, did the only thing his understanding of war left available to him. He decided that if the human world's impossible weapon was a single ship, then the answer was to find that ship and destroy it, law or no law, consequence or no consequence. He would gather what remained of his throttled fleet, throw it in one desperate mass at the pale, gentle vessel on his frontier, and burn the Cassandra out of the sky, and gamble everything on the hope that killing the mirror would blind the eye behind it. The engine saw it coming 41 days out. It saw the fleet begin to gather. It saw the throttled ships take on what isotope they could scrape together, enough for one battle at full output, no more. It saw the vectors assemble, the whole doomed operation take shape out of 1,000 small signals, and it laid the enemy's entire plan before Kesa Moreno like a hand of cards turned face up on the table. She had 41 days, and she had the mirror, and she had a map of the enemy's mind, and she had, this time, a decision to make that was harder than any she had made before, because the fleet coming for her was real and its weapons were real, and the Cassandra could not fight. It had no guns. It had no armor. If that fleet reached her, it would kill her and every soul aboard, the 11 old keel masters and their grandchildren, and there was not one thing aboard the ship that could stop a single shot. The keel masters gathered in the computing core, as they had gathered in the machine hall 2 years before, and old Tomas Vey, older now and slower but no less sharp, said what they were all thinking. You built a ship that can't fight, girl, and now a fleet's coming to fight it. I've spent my life building things that could shoot back. Tell me you have an answer, because this is the part where a warship would matter, and we don't have one, and we can't get one. And that's the whole trap we walked into with our eyes open. And Kesa Moreno looked at the old man who had built the ships that won the last war, and she said, "We don't need to shoot back, keel master. We need them to understand before they arrive that arriving is worse than turning around. That was always the whole design. Force wins a battle. Knowing wins the war before the battle starts. They're coming because they've decided that continuing is better than stopping. So I'm going to change their arithmetic. I'm going to make stopping the only thing they can bear to do. And I'm going to do it with the one weapon they can't take from me, which is that I know them completely and they don't understand me at all." She had 41 days. And she spent them not building weapons but building certainty. She reached into the Ascendancy one last time, through every thread the mirror had mapped over 2 years, and she did not attack. She revealed *. to Emperor VTH Surin's own fleet, to the very captains who were being ordered to their deaths. She sent, through untraceable cutouts, in the clear, undeniable, the truth of their own situation as the mirror saw it. She sent them the coolant telemetry that proved their reactors could sustain full battle output for exactly one engagement and no return. She sent them the internal command traffic that proved 3 of their own admirals had already privately concluded the operation was suicide, and were saying so to each other while assuring the throne of victory. She sent them the supply figures that proved that even if they won, even if they burned the Cassandra asterisk to atoms, their empire had 9 weeks of strategic isotope left and no way to get more, because a shipping company they could not fight had bought it all. She did not tell them a single lie. She told them, with the flawless precision of a machine that had watched them breathe for 2 years, exactly what their own commanders were hiding from them. She made the enemy's fleet understand its own true situation better than its emperor did. And then she sent one thing more, aimed not at the fleet but at the throne, and this was the final thread, the load-bearing thread, the one the engine had found on the very first day and had held in reserve for 2 years for precisely this moment. She sent Emperor VTH Surin proof of who, in his own court, was already preparing to replace him when this operation failed. Because the engine had known for a year, had read it in the pattern of who met whom and when and what moved afterward, that the emperor's own war minister had concluded the human campaign was lost and had begun, quietly, to assemble the faction that would remove VTH Surin the moment his last gamble failed. It was true. Kesa had the proof. And she sent it to the emperor 41 days before his fleet was due to arrive, so that VTH Surin, on the eve of his great desperate throw of the dice, learned that the throw was already lost in the eyes of his own court, that his war minister was measuring him for the grave, that the fleet he was sending to die would not even buy him his throne, and that the enemy who had told him all of this had done it not as a threat but as a demonstration. See how completely I know you. See that there is nothing in your empire, not even the plot to kill you, that I have not already read. The fleet never came. It gathered and it took on its isotope, and it received its orders, and then, 41 days out in closing, it simply stopped. The captains who had been sent the truth of their own doom refused, one by one, to spend their lives on an operation their own commanders had privately called suicide. The 3 admirals who had concluded it was hopeless found the courage, now that the fleet itself knew what they knew, to say so aloud. And Emperor VTH Surin, staring at the proof that his own court had already buried him, that even total victory would not save his empire or his throne, that his enemy had reached into the deepest secret of his palace as easily as into a shipping manifest, understood at last the thing the conquered had never understood. He understood that he had lost, not the battle had never been fought. He had lost the asterisk war, completely and without a shot, to an enemy he had never seen, wielding a weapon he could not name, and the only choice left to him was whether to continue into certain ruin or to stop. He stopped. The reformed VTH ascendancy sued for terms, not to the human worlds, to the conquered, formally, in open session, offering a full and permanent renunciation of all claim to the human frontier in exchange for a guarantee of its own borders. It came to the table not because it had been defeated in the field, but because it had been made, with perfect and inescapable clarity, to understand that continuing was the most terrifying thing it could possibly do. The pale, gentle ship on its frontier had never fired a shot. It had simply known everything, and revealed exactly enough of what it knew, at exactly the right moments, to make an empire stop wanting to exist as it had been. Force wins a battle. Knowing wins the war before the battle starts. Kesa Moreno was 44 when the ascendancy signed its terms, and the galaxy she left behind was not the galaxy she had been born into. The conquered never did pass its amendment. It could not. Every attempt to ban the Cassandra died the same death, strangled by the discovery that you cannot outlaw understanding without outlawing yourself. But it did not need to in the end, because the thing the conquered had most feared came to pass anyway, exactly as Kesa had warned Admiral Vosseren it would. The small world started building. Not warships. Warships were still banned, still pointless, still the loud crude road that the Cassandra had proven no one needed. They built mirrors. Every frightened people who had watched Kesa Moreno unmake an empire with knowledge began, in 1,000 harbors, to build their own engines, their own listening ships, their own ways of seeing. The age of the warship, which the conquered had thought it was preserving for itself by banning it only for humanity, quietly ended for everyone. Because who would build a battleship now, when the whole galaxy had watched a hospital ship dismantle an empire without firing a shot? Force had been dethroned. Knowing had taken its place. And the terrible democratic truth of knowing was that it could not be hoarded like guns, could not be denied to the weak the way weapons could, because its raw material was only data, and its only requirement was the wit to understand, and wit, unlike a shipyard, could not be inspected, licensed, or banned. The conquered had banned human warships to keep the peace by keeping its monopoly on force, and it had instead ended force itself, and handed the galaxy a weapon that the strong could not keep from the weak, and made itself, at a stroke, no safer than the smallest world it had once looked down upon. Vorel Sunt, the Sithka inspector, wrote the sentence that the historians eventually agreed said it best. We spent 11 years making certain that humanity could never build a sword. We should have spent them asking why humanity had stopped reaching for one. Kesa Moreno went home to Bright Fortune Station. She stood one last time in the machine hall where her grandmother had built the ships that won the old war, the hall that had built the ship that ended the new kind of war before it began. And she was, by every account, a quiet woman still, watchful and strange, the kind who took the universe apart not to break it, but because she could not bear not to know how it wanted to work. A young engineer, one of the keel master's grandchildren, found her there and asked the question that everyone wanted to ask and no one dared. Dr. Moreno, they banned our warships and called it mercy, and you built something that scared them so much more than any warship ever could. Do you think was that the plan all along, to make them regret the ban, to make them wish they'd only let us build ships? And Kesa Moreno, who was 44 and looked older and had never once fired a weapon in her life, looked around the great cold hall where the pale ship had been built, and she thought about a blind old woman in a kitchen 30 years before, saying they banned us from being able to fight, and there's a difference asterisk. No, she said, the plan was never to make them regret it. The plan was to make them understand what they'd done. They thought they'd taken our teeth, but teeth were never the thing that made us dangerous. The thing that makes us dangerous is that when you back us into a corner and take away the loud road, we go looking for the quiet one, and we don't stop looking until we find it. They banned the sword because they thought the sword was the danger, but the sword was only ever a tool the danger reached for. And when they took the tool away, the danger just reached for a better one. And the better one turned out to be the one weapon in the universe that they could never, ever take back, because to take it away, they'd have had to make it a crime to be wise. She looked at the young engineer for a long moment. They wanted us harmless, she said, so they made us think. That was their mistake. A people you've disarmed will surrender. A people you've made asterisk think asterisk will simply find another way to win, and it will be a way you never imagined, because you were too busy watching the door you expected us to break down to notice the one you left standing wide open. They banned our warships, and so we built the one thing more terrifying than any warship ever made, a machine that understands you completely, that breaks no law you can name, that no fleet can stop and no border can keep out. We built a mirror. And when they finally looked into it, they saw the truth they'd been running from since the day they signed the leash and called it mercy. Outside the hall, 40 light years away, An empire that had meant to erase the human world's one warm, empty room at a time was drawing up its borders and burying its emperor and learning to live beside a people it had never managed to touch. And across the settled galaxy, in 1,000 frightened harbors, the small worlds were building mirrors of their own, and the long age of the warship was ending, and something quieter and stranger and far more permanent was taking its place. "What truth?" the young engineer asked. Kesa Moreno turned toward the great doors of the machine hall, and the last thing she said before she walked out into the light was the only answer the galaxy would ever need. "That you cannot make a thinking people harmless," she said. "You can only make them creative, and a creative enemy is the most terrifying thing in the universe, because you will never once see the weapon coming until the moment you realize it has already won."